And for those of you who don't see me often, I'm Terry Burton. I'm the president of the Academy. And so we are really grateful that you all joined us this afternoon. We think that this is a really important conversation, and we're pleased to host it here at the Academy in front of ASPA. About 6 or 8 months ago, our friend Sanjay Pandey, who is a fellow and on the faculty at GW, approached us with an idea that he was hearing a lot of concern in the space about a disconnect between the research faculty in the public administration space and the practitioners. And he had this idea of getting a panel together around ASPA. So Sanjay was able to make that happen, but not able to be here today to see all of his efforts come to fruition. But about the same time as we were having that conversation, the Volcker Alliance really began their government to university initiative, where they were exploring better connections between the practitioner and the academic community. So we're thrilled to have Sarah here from the Volcker Alliance, and she'll be part of the later program. So we are really excited about the opportunity to continue this conversation today, because we think it is really fundamental to moving our Grand Challenges initiative forward effectively. We imagine that once we've identified those grand challenges, which I know you will all want to come to the fall meeting to hear, you can register now, November 7th and 8th, that the effective solution set is only going to be arrived at if we are effectively partnering academics and practitioners at every point on the solution spectrum. So we are hoping that today's discussion continues to move us down that road, that we are going to look at different ideas, different opportunities. We want to understand what are the motivations for both sides of that conversation in the current system, and if we need to change incentives or motivations, how do we do that to bring people together better. So I really appreciate all of you being here to have the conversation with us. I will say you have a program on your chair with all of the bios in it. And so in the interest of not taking any time away from the conversation, I'm going to let you read those. I'm not going to read them to you. Besides that, you'll know most of the folks who are up here. So we're going to jump right in with our first conversation. We are so excited to have the co-editors of the Public Administration Review with us today to talk about what they look for in publications and why some of those incentives are the way they are. So Paul and Jeremy, I will turn it over to you. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. We really appreciate this opportunity. And I agree, ASPA, when we have these kind of meetings in DC, especially for ASPA, it's a good chance for all of us to get together and cooperate on a number of different initiatives. So as Jeremy and I, as co-editors in chief of Public Administration Review, we could talk a lot about what kind of research articles we'd like to see, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the metrics for the journal. But the first thing I'd like to say is, Jeremy and I both come from the practitioner background. We both worked in state government before our careers in the academy, and so we can very much appreciate the importance of public administration research and its ability to bridge, to collaborate, and to find agreement on practice, to improve practice. So I worked in state government for 6 years in Louisiana. I worked for a governor who I tried to get to read PAR on many occasions, not interested. And so I know to some extent the frustration that many in the practitioner community have at times to understanding what is research telling us, what is it doing to advance practice. And so when Jeremy and I first started putting together our packet for taking on PAR, we thought really long and hard about this, about what we can do not only to improve research, but also research that makes a difference. And so there are two things that I would just talk about real briefly right now, and that is one, our practitioner points, that is evidence for practice. You'll see in every research article, we ask for specific points that are evidence for practice. Pretty much summing up for the governor I work for, right? What is this article saying? Not just the abstract, but what is the follow-through? What is the evidence that we can then use to implement for good policy? What makes for good policy or good practice in public administration? The other feature that Jeremy and I started that we're very proud of is our viewpoint feature. So Viewpoint was specifically an instrument that Jeremy and I saw as engaging the public administration, academic community, and practitioners. That is, its main focus is to talk about a specific salient issue. Maybe there's not enough research on it. Maybe it's a call for more research. And it's a way to bring attention to areas of need in terms of practice and research. So it's something that we've asked for participation from both the scholarly and practitioner community. And we're proud to say, I think that we've done a really good job over the last year in seeing submissions from both academics and practitioners calling attention to important issues, like grand challenges, right, that NAPA is keen on making our larger community aware of. And so Viewpoint has really, I think, done a really good job at creating a conversation about what is important and what we can do for PAR moving forward to bridge these two communities. I'll stop now, Joe.
By all means, keep going. You're doing a fine job. So most of you are probably familiar with PAR, or you wouldn't be here. At least most of you are aware that it is a scholarly academic journal. PAR is the journal of the American Society of Public Administration. ASPA owns the journal. We're appointed to edit the journal. It's purely service. We're not compensated for our work or our time. And, you know, it's like donating blood. Altruistic activities sometimes generate a better outcome, I think. And so we are conscientious because we work for ASPA, in a sense, of the mission to serve practitioners as well as scholars. This is a true challenge for us because very often we find the work that we do competing. You know, we're competing with ourselves in many ways. So we can publish research articles that will garner lots and lots of citations and help the journal's impact factor. PAR is currently the #1 rated journal in public administration out of 47 on the list. We're also #1 in Google Scholar citations. So we're at the top of the top in terms of impact. Our impact factor is 4.591. We're doing very well in terms of the scholarly side. Our challenge is to serve practitioners, like Paul said. And so we've been very strategic in the way that we've tried to embrace that part of our mission. The evidence for practice points that appear at the beginning of each research article are an effort to take research toward practice. Viewpoint is an effort to take practice toward research. But that's only the beginning of the conversation. And as Paul said, the Viewpoint feature was different. It was new. We still have trouble getting reviewers to understand what it is that we're looking for when we send them those manuscripts. But having said that, they're coming in organically. For the first year of our term, we had to go out and beat the bushes pretty regularly to find submissions. As an audience, you are our target. We are extremely interested. The grand challenges in particular, I see so much potential coming from that. What are the salient issues that are occurring? What are the issues that we need to be looking forward to? In other words, not looking back or not looking at the present, but what should we be looking forward to? Where should research be directed in the future? What's happening in our organizations now that's innovative, that we could transition into an academic discussion, perhaps? And so it goes both ways. But we really do want Viewpoint to be a voice for the practice community within PAR. It's our job to balance the impact factor side of that. You know, we're not going to stop publishing things that appeal to practice just because it hurts the impact factor, because that violates our mission. It's not what we do. Previous editors of PAR have mentioned that you can measure impact in a lot of ways. Citations is a big one. The impact factor and Google Scholar citation reports are another. PAR articles are downloaded about 1.5 million times per year through libraries, through JSTOR, through Wiley's website. You know, it's an incredible resource for scholars and practitioners around the globe. Another side of what we've done, and another challenge for us really, is to expand PAR beyond just the United States and Western Europe. PAR has always had a very strong audience in the US. We have a very strong audience in Western Europe. We have a developing but fairly strong audience in China and South Korea. Australia is another frequent contributor. Andrew is around here somewhere. There you are. So we see manuscripts coming from certain parts of the world, but the world is now a smaller place. And things that used to be salient or relevant in their own location now matter to all of us in different ways. And so we're cognizant of that. And we're reaching out through symposia and other efforts to try to bridge those gaps as well. And so we're not just looking for things from the U.S., we're not just looking from things that come from a particular setting, but things that cross boundaries, that address unique and emerging topics in a variety of ways. If we're talking about impact, there are new measures that we have to worry about every day. Altmetric. Anybody ever heard that before?
I never had until I took on this job.
Yeah, it's one of those fun things
You
that
hang out with librarians.
It's one of those fun things where you come on and they say, so your altmetric score is, what? Social media, basically, or media impact. So when PAR articles are cited, mentioned in Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, New York Times, Fox News maybe, I don't know what all they capture. Anytime an article is mentioned, altmetric captures that and flags it. And so now we're looking at sort of the conversational impact that our publications are having. And so we can measure impact a number of ways. The point is, we have to stay true to our mission to be one of the top scholarly journals, generalist journals, and to also merge the practice with scholarship and find a way to make one relevant to the other. I would only add that Viewpoint to us was looked at sort of as a, well, first it was partially experimental. We hadn't, PAR didn't have a history of doing this, and so it was a new idea, something we were trying for the first time. But our goal was to take things that were submitted for Viewpoint and move them through the system more quickly. They're still peer reviewed, but we only use 2 reviewers instead of 3. And we use a very
Well, we give them, like we said, we give reviewers guidelines that are supposed to let them know this is not a typical research article, but sometimes they go at it like it's a real research article. Okay, this is more about a conversation right now.
Yeah, but so if a salient topic coming up that's timely and important now, we want to publish it before it's old news. And that's very difficult in the publication world. Things, you know, we publish research articles online in early view, of course. And so they're out there waiting sort of to appear in print, but something might be a year and a half or 2 years before it ever appears in print after it's accepted. That's not our fault. There's just a backlog that's necessary to manage the print publication. And so everything that we can do to encourage the dialogue, to bridge practice and scholarship, and to do it in a timely fashion, I think is really our goal. It's our mission, and we want to do everything possible to make that happen. We can't do it by ourselves. You know, PAR is in many ways the product of the people that read it and contribute to it. And so we need you to look at PAR as an opportunity to share the innovative things that are going on in your organizations, or the innovative ideas that you have for research, or new ways of looking at old problems, perhaps. And whether it's scholarly research that would appear as a research article, or whether it's something that's very practitioner-oriented that might appear as a Viewpoint, we're interested in it. And we invite you to come to us, to send us an email, to talk with us about what we might do.
Yeah, if you're not sure about the fit, we're more than happy to discuss it via email or phone call. We can talk about whether something's a fit for Viewpoint or not. I would add too, as Jeremy was saying, you know, obviously our proximity with ASPA, we're very tied into being, at least historically, the journal for the American Public Administration Society, right? I would say that PAR, because of the 1.5 million downloads and the strength of its reputation, PAR has become much larger than just the United States. I mean, it is seen as the top journal in many countries across the world. And so, using Viewpoint, we've also been able to bring in discussions from other countries as well about timely practitioner-related topics. And there have been a few in Viewpoint, and Jeremy mentioned Andrew has made some contributions.
John, I think John Kaminsky,
Yeah.
He's published a Viewpoint for us.
Right, and Andrew specifically about kind of Australia and public administration, and adding to the conversation that there's a lot going on outside of the U.S. as well that may be of interest to administrators here in the U.S. And so Viewpoint we've used as well to be kind of more global as well in terms of practitioner outreach. So we could keep talking.
Yeah,
but
we can talk
I
all day.
think if we have 30 minutes, or maybe we have the 15 minutes here for any kind of discussion, questions.
So, in getting the perspectives over the last, since you've been editors, what's the 2 or 3 biggest surprises you've learned from hearing from practitioners in those columns?
Biggest surprises.
So I would say one, as I just mentioned, the international outreach of PAR. I guess I was surprised that initially we got more submissions and more interaction from international practitioners and scholars about Viewpoint than people here in the U.S. initially. I suppose I was thinking early on we would get a lot of people from DC, from state capitals interested in kind of talking and having a conversation. Think tanks, that's true, very much so, yeah, think tanks, associations, wanting to have a conversation. And we actually reached out to many of these associations and never really heard anything back. But it was international practitioners and academics who really wanted to kind of start the discussion, start the debate. And so that, I think, had us kind of rethinking some of our orientation. And so some of us, our orientation, at least internationally, strategically is to play upon some of our contacts, and we use that to try to get a dialogue going in Latin America because we have a lot of outreach there. We have a lot of people on our editorial board, on our editorial team, and so it's kind of, I think, a timely discussion as well, given a lot of the things that are going on in Latin America and here in the U.S. And so that was, I'd say, the biggest surprise to me was just it really seemed to spark some interest outside of the U.S. quicker.
I think the biggest surprise to me was what we haven't heard, what we haven't seen. And we made some, at the beginning of our editorial term, we made some very specific, pointed invitations to key associations, the Big Seven in particular, to introduce them to Viewpoint, to introduce them to our vision for the feature, and to invite them to submit evaluation findings or innovative practices or things that they wanted to talk about that were of concern to their constituents, to their stakeholders. And we heard crickets in response. So, opening the door and saying, we really do want to hear about what's going on, and receiving virtually nothing in response was, I think, surprising to me. Because, there is such a conversation about bridging the gap between research and practice. And we felt like if we're an academic, scholarly journal stepping forward, reaching out, making this opportunity available, somebody would jump at it. And so I think that would be my surprise.
So what do you make of it?
Well, that's why we're here. That the dialogue needs to continue, but it needs to continue at a deeper level. And what we found to be successful, and correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, is that where we've highlighted people that we knew were doing interesting work on particular topics, and reached out to them specifically as individuals, and invited them to submit something. We've been successful there. We haven't mentioned, we should mention Steve Condry is our associate editor for Viewpoint, and Tanya Neves at George Mason University is another associate editor who works on Viewpoint for us. And they do a lot of the vetting in terms of receiving proposals and, like I said, beating the bushes. But we have found that those individual kinds of contact have been the most successful. And
one thing I would add too is we've had some who, if we've reached out to these folks, they still want to submit it as a research article because it looks better. At least that's the view. And we've had to, and I think we've done it successfully, convince them that this might be a better fit for Viewpoint. And we've worked with some of these authors, and they're both from the academy or from practice, in terms of kind of whittling it down to the 3,000 plus or minus words, and to the guidelines for making this about a conversation more than a contribution to research. So I would say that has been one of the more helpful things is, I think if you want to make something about it, if we're trying to figure out why, to some extent I think people still want to submit research articles. They want to see a research article in PAR. And we're trying to tell them, look, you need to think about in terms of some of this, maybe it makes more sense as a Viewpoint contribution than a research article.
I would say it goes, that gets at really a deeper point, which is what are the incentives? What do those individuals look at as their incentives to taking time and converting research findings or an idea into something that can be published? What benefit do they get from that? Are they rewarded within their institutional setting? We know professors are rewarded for publication, and of course, they definitely want research articles. But what about people who are practitioners? what motivates them, what would motivate them to submit something to us, to take the time. You know, this doesn't happen on its own. This takes time. This takes effort. And then, I mean, the sad truth is that once we peer review it, which we have to do, sometimes it gets rejected. And that doesn't help us to build those bridges. That leaves a sour taste in people's mouths. If they've worked on something they didn't have to work on, and they've sent it to us, and then we have to reject it, I think that, you know, that doesn't help our case.
And this, I would say, just circles back to some extent why the international uptick in submissions. One thing I learned pretty quickly is that a lot of ministries in other countries, they will count publications for practitioners. It goes towards their promotion or towards their job evaluation, something. I know that for a fact with the Italians, for example. I work with an Italian university, and I know that the ministries there that cover these things, it's part of their performance evaluation if they contribute. And there's a list of journals, PAR, or Review of Public Personnel Administration. These count towards something. And I think that explains some of the international interest in Viewpoint, is that it's probably an easier hurdle than a research article. And it perhaps gets a conversation. I saw his,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I know he's had his hand
We're
up.
on this
I
side.
keep
We'll come back.
interrupting him.
Well, you know, there's a demand. You know, I'm Robert Goldencock with GAO, and I think that, so I've been a practitioner now for over 30 years, and I think within the practitioner community, there is demand for research. You know, we talk about these grand challenges. I think that, you know, don't take offense by this. I think it's these two different roles that we're discussing, is that the research that's in PAR is just, it's not relevant and it's not timely. And you know, when I think about this, I think of the model of, you know, basic research and in the hard sciences and the scientific community, where, you know, this notion that it would take 40 years, an entire generation, to go from basic research to something that was ready for the marketplace. But the way they solved that was, I mean, a lot of ways, but one way was just forging closer ties between academia and industry, where they would have people in industry would embed themselves, they'd work in universities, people in universities would work in industry, and the research became more relevant, it became more timely, and it kept the United States more globally competitive. So is there a need for that type of a model, just not just kind of outreach, but actually embedding people from both sectors, so these conversations are taking place, and this is a greater understanding of what the research demands are?
Just actually, it's a kind of very related comment. So I'm Rob Steiner from OMB. We're both like the human capital, so you do have legislative and executive.
Right.
And a lot of our jobs is keeping up on what are the best practices, where do we need to go. And I also have to be honest, whenever I'm tasked with figuring out what a new policy should be, I have an academic background, I try to go to the journal, and it has been a very long time since PAR has had any article that I can use to help drive what our agenda should be, what the undertaking is. In fact, it's now usually the other way around, where I'm being called by academics asking to study what it is. So a lot with employee engagement, a lot of what we've done the past few years has been cultural changing in government. We're getting a lot of calls about using our data, but I have yet to receive a call from an academic kind of saying, here's something that I think you should adopt now. Here's something to be guiding. And when I look at PAR, you're right. I'm looking at stuff that is 3 years ago. I'm already deep into 2020 in terms of planning. I can't look at what happened in 2013 as a guidepost to actually develop public administration on the ground. And I read GAO material more just because it's current.
It's not that worried.
It's just the idea of a lot of the theory, it doesn't play out in a lot of the research articles. Theory is great, but I can tell you in my 5 years at OMB, I've never looked at a p-value. I've never looked at an R squared. I've never, it doesn't come into the world of how we write.
No, what you're saying is the same thing, the conversations I had in the governor's office and with state administrators and civil servants, the people that headed up the state departments in the state of Louisiana. I was hearing the same thing, and I completely understand that. And we saw Viewpoint as a way for people in your situation, working in federal government, right, that are seeing this meets the road. using viewpoint as a way of saying, scholars, academics, this is what you need to be doing research on. This is what we need answers to. And that's at least what our vision for viewpoint was, okay? And what there's one area of research where I think there's a closer connection is the behavioral public administration research. Because I know a lot of people that are doing that research, for example, here in DC, are working with the lab in DC. They're actually doing things that, to some extent, are making a real difference immediately, or if not immediately, pretty quickly. So there are some exceptions, but I think you're right. Most of the conversations, at least Jeremy, correct me wrong, when I worked in state government, nobody asked me about a p-value, nobody asked me about statistical significance. I want to know what works and what doesn't work.
But that's what a p-value tells you.
It does.
The
No,
academic
well,
has to stand up
you're right.
rigorous research.
But again, if I have to get this passed through Congress or through the state legislature, they don't care they just don't care. So we had academics for the governor that I who worked with us, and that was the response. The governor would say, "So I'm going to go to the committee and tell them a bunch of p-values." I can tell you the state legislature, and this is Louisiana, by the way, they're going to want to say, "What do I get out of this?" Right? Your point is well taken, and it is a tricky position that Jeremy and I are in balancing that impact factor, our significance in the academic community, but also our mission towards the greater public administration community. And I do truly believe that viewpoint is the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, and we've reached out in other ways as well. We have a blog that's sort of in its very earliest form on our website, which is also intended to be a point where we can take in sort of opinions and ideas about current events and salient topics. We have one series that's already posted there, and 2 more are coming up pretty soon. That's sort of ancillary to our core mission. It's not, that doesn't count, in other words, towards our performance goals per se. But, the things that you mentioned are obviously important, and they just really recapitulate the kinds of problems that we have. GAO, you produce your own reports, and they're frequently cited in PAR. I read GAO reports all the time because they're very practice-oriented, they're very problem-focused. Scholarly articles are not problem-focused. I mean, the hook might have a problem in it just to try to get the reviewers interested, but at the end of the day, they're theory-focused and maybe mechanism-focused to some extent, but they're not problem-focused. And part of what we're hoping to do, right? The world is completely engrossed in evidence-based this and that right now. And part of what we hope to do with the evidence for practice points was to distill the article into 3 bullet points that somebody could look at the beginning. It comes before the abstract. Could look at that at the beginning of the article and say, okay, this is something that might matter to the problem I'm looking at. And, we're still experimenting with that. We haven't found a way to ensure that we're communicating the right information. And so if you all have feedback on what we're doing, we would love to hear specific criticisms about how we could improve or how we could change our approach to be able to address that. The conversation about p-values, if you're reading it in PAR, you shouldn't worry about the p-value because we and our reviewers have already dealt with that. If the p-value is not good, it didn't make it through. That's true.
Can I have one? First of all, let me concur with the last 2 comments over there. I'm Paris Glendenning. I've served as a practitioner for 31 years, and academician for 27. Now, best of both, not problem. But it seems to me, and I don't know there's an answer to this, but building on the last observation of the relevance to the people out in the field, one of the challenges I think is very much related to timeliness and ability to respond, and also questions of what is subject or capable of being carefully reviewed in a scientific discipline to it. But the challenge is, I believe, that there are some really big issues out there right now that are tearing the country apart. The issues, obviously, climate change, the equity issue, the infrastructure issue, paying for government, getting over this thing that is free ride, we can actually pay. These issues, I think, are the ones that are pushing so much in terms of the change in what's going on. There's a reason why this Green New Deal has elicited such a response and all, and that is it's coming right to the heart of so many of the things we're facing. It's the reason why people were so amazed and continue to follow why Amazon left and why we kind of kicked them out and things like this. And yet, both from the nature of the rigor that you need in the journal and the timeliness, these things are not addressed at all. And so part of the question, I think, is do you end up saying, yes, we agree, but this is not our role, or is there a way that we can figure out how to get into that debate, because it's going to become more and more intense in the next several years. And I read PAR regularly.
Thank you.
I don't know that I use anything from it, but I use it.
But we appreciate your
Reader's Digest version, right? You know, if I could respond to that quickly. What was I going to say? Our editorials. So, in particular, the editorial to issue 79.1. We look back on our first year as editors and sort of thought about what we've seen come in the door and how it fits with the world around us. And we tried to pinpoint what we're seeing too much of and what we're not seeing enough of in terms of those kinds of problems. That's our way of saying to the research community and to the practice community, you're not doing a good enough job. Please bring this in our direction because we want to see more of it. The world is divided today. Political vitriol characterizes everything that we know in terms of policy making, and I'm sure it trickles down into administration. You know, we do have that history in state government before our academic careers. I can't imagine what it's like today. That was a different world, a different era. And you know, those things, they matter. Just to give you a taste of one of the things that irritates me. Maybe I shouldn't do this. We talk about relevance. Is this relevant to practice? Is it currently important? We see an increasing number of pieces that look at schools, hospitals, and nursing homes. I mean, you would literally look at the things that come in the door at PAR on a daily basis and think, wow, is there anything else? And it's because the data are readily available. And researchers have a bad habit of going out to a good data set and mining it to death to be able to answer a conceptual question.
That gets to your comments, I'm sorry if we need to stop. But it gets to, so one of the things I've noticed, I have, for example, I have greater access to data in Mexico and Italy than I do in the US. I don't know why, but that's one of the things. So, and that's why we get nursing homes, because the data's there. We get schools, the data's there. So I think one way, we need to figure out some kind of clearinghouse. I don't know, now I could just keep talking, but we need to figure out a way to make data available, because that's the problem. If I can get data in Italy and not have a problem.
Right, so the Evidence Act, we'll have a separate session on that one. All right, so first of all, I want to thank Paul and Jeremy for warming up the audience. All right, for the second panel. We're going to bring them back up here at the end for part of the group Q&A. So let you guys go take a seat. Yes?
What do we do?
you're coming back.
We leave? Okay, no. All right.
There's 2
We're
seats
welcome back?
right over there for
We
you.
didn't, okay, good, we didn't offend anybody.
You get
Okay,
to come
good.
back. I'm going to bring up our
Thank you.
panel. So if you are on the second panel, come on up. Grab your name tag, pick a chair. We're really thrilled to have this next panel for you. We're going to take a lot of the ideas we just talked about and talk about how they move into practice. So we have folks from all of the different interest areas in the conversation. And so we'll get you seated, and then I'm going to turn it over to Sarah. And so please save your questions. We're coming back around. If you noticed in the program, we set aside 45 minutes more for Q&A. So, well, tight. We're coming back.
So I'll put you here as well. Well, she had them all, so that's what I thought.
Hey everyone. Hi Sarah. My My name's Sarah Mogilescu. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Volcker Alliance. And the Volcker Alliance is a not-for-profit organization. We're located in New York City. It's founded by the former Federal Reserve Chair, Paul Volcker. And our mission is to advance effective management practices that deliver results to citizens. Government, making government work better. And I just maybe quickly, I know we have the bios, if everybody just wants to kind of quickly say their name and who they are before we jump in, that would be helpful. You want to start?
I'm Steve Trachtenberg.
What do you do?
I'm the former president of George Washington University.
Barbara Romzek, 20-some years of academic leadership, dean, vice provost, etc., different universities.
Suzanne Logan, jack of all trades, master of none. University work, private sector, nonprofit. For the last 7 years, deputy associate director at OPM, the director for the Center for Leadership Development, and the director for the Federal Executive Institute.
Bob Tobias, American University, associated with the Key Executive Leadership Program. Prior to that, president of the labor union. Prior to that, general counsel of a labor union. And prior to that, a child.
Well, excellent intros. So I always like to start a panel like this off by stating the problem, but I think that the previous panel really did that quite well. The disconnect between academia and practitioners is ever more attenuated, right? And the thinking about the kinds of articles that are produced and whether or not they are responsive to the timely, urgent needs of the folks who are running the show and on the practitioner side. So we at the Volcker Alliance are really excited about one of our new initiatives. It's called the Government to University Initiative. We lovingly call it G2U. And what it is premised on is just a very simple hypothesis that bringing together structured partnerships between universities, right? And by that we mean career offices, administrators, faculty, students, and government practitioners of all levels, state and local, in an area, just the fact of bringing them together can be can have a catalytic effect. And while it may have a catalytic effect on many things, we're particularly interested in two. One is the talent pipeline. So the idea that bringing universities and government together might help us recruit the best talent into practitioner roles that is a very important problem at the moment. And then also, what we're here to talk about today, the connection between what practitioners need to do their jobs better in terms of research, science, support, applied work, and the university capacity that's nearby. And so our theory is that there's an absence of a marketplace, that supply and demand have no place to find each other, and that if we can build some connectors, network theory, that in and of itself is going to help, and I think we heard this conversation before, just forging closer ties between academic and industry. I think you were talking about that earlier. That's what we're thinking about here, not rocket science, but very potential. So we went out across the country this past fall and tried to test out our hypothesis. We went to Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, we went to Austin and the J School and the school surrounding, we went to UNC Chapel Hill and the school surrounding there, and we went to Kansas City. And we held sessions with folks on all the kinds of people I'm talking about, on topics relating to the talent pipeline, skills and preparedness, and the research connection between the two. And I'm just going to focus on research today, but we learned a ton. And I guess our hypothesis that it would be helpful to bring these folks together, that's what we learned the most. That there is a desire, a need to, you'd think that those connections would be happening organically, but they're not. So just the fact of cultivating the network is something that folks seem very excited about. On the research side, this concept of marketplace kept coming up. How can the demand, the practitioners, connect to the supply? Sometimes it happens and it's very relationship based. There'll be a faculty member or a program or a particular practitioner who's developed relationships over time or knows where to go, but holistically we don't see the connectors there. It's very ad hoc. The notion of time and speed and relevance, quick, what practitioners need oftentimes can't wait. And so how do you find ways of tapping into research capacity that gives you faster, helpful results, and may also lead to a longer term project that has incredible importance as well. We talked about the misalignment of incentives in a lot of places. I think we started to hear that a little bit before, just what's expected of faculty, what they believe they are rewarded for, and that's hard to surmount, but I think that's something we'll continue to talk about. And then we also talked about this notion of engaging students and the power of engaging students of all levels in active, applied work that solves real problems. And one of the reasons why we like that so much at the Volcker Alliance is because not only is that a venue and avenue for delivering to practitioners, but it also reinforces the talent pipeline by actually showing students what it means to be in the trenches and what it means to really be in government and to add value in that way. So it is easier said than done to create these kinds of marketplaces that I'm describing, but we're ready to do it, and in the next phase of GTU, we hope that we will. But I think that we want to talk today about some of the perspectives of the panelists about how we might find some of these solutions and how we might think about this problem in different ways from different perspectives. So I guess I just want to start with an open question, and maybe Bob can start. Yeah?
I thought you were going to start at the other. That's
No,
why I said
no, we just sat in random order.
Oh,
But I
okay.
thought we started with you. That just to talk about what does government need from universities when it comes to research support, and what do universities need from government? Can you kind of just give us a little bit of a context-setting answer?
Well, I think that most practitioners don't wake up in the morning and say to themselves, what research do I need to advance my cause? They wake up in the morning and they say, how the hell do I get the job done? So to ask practitioners to imagine what research they need, I think is a waste of time. But if you put practitioners in the room and ask them to identify the problems they're facing, those who think about research can learn what they might do to assist them in solving their problems. Because, if I'm writing for PAR, I'm not writing for the practitioner. I'm writing for other scholars. And, I have a little quibble with that because I think public administration is really about practice. It's not about theory. It's about practice. It's about making government work better. And so theory is interesting, and it gets people to be PhDs, but it doesn't help those who are in the trenches trying to figure out how to do better and how to make it happen. And I think, just briefly, this idea of the misalignment of incentives is really a fundamental issue, because if I am rewarded as someone seeking tenure or who has tenure solely on the number of times I publish in PAR, I will never spend any time on viewpoint. I will never spend any time listening to practitioners because I don't care. That's not my incentive. So if indeed we're to bridge this gap I was really interested to learn that if I lived in Italy, I wouldn't mind living.
Oh, these days you might.
Oh, no, the food is still good, the wine is still good.
I don't think you like the politics.
Well, I don't like the politics here. So,
They're very similar.
well, the food is still better in England.
Yes.
Finish your thought.
So the idea is, if professors received credit for bridging that gap, I think we'd all be better off.
So, let's talk a little bit about this, Barbara, maybe you could tackle it from, this idea that research opportunities should be informed by problems. So I like the way that, Bob, you kind of flipped it. Like, you know, I'm not asking you for research questions. I'm asking you practitioners to come in and think about what you're struggling with, so that maybe we can orient ourselves to provide answers for you in a range of ways, short-term, long-term, so on. When you think about helping to connect research opportunities to the problems that are actively in play, what kinds of things come to mind?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I think for a lot of scholars, practitioners do help them define the research question. And so I think we need more connection. Some of my best research ideas have come from hanging out with practitioners who say, oh, well, you know, what you're talking about is great, but here's the real problem. And then I take that away and go, oh, all right, well, they put me on this path instead of that one. So I think it's a missed opportunity if we don't get academics and practitioners together in regular conversation. And I don't mean once a year at ASPA. I mean frequent interchange. Maybe it's small panels, but what the inducement for faculty is always data. So you folks arguing about OMB and GAO not hearing anything from researchers, it's because we don't get the data you folks have. So when people don't do the research you want to know, it's because faculty can't get access to those data. So if you want to dangle data in front of an academic, they'll like a shark to minnows, they'll grab it. So what the incentives for people to publish are not going to go away in universities. But if you can make for quicker exchange between practitioners and academics, more frequent conversations about what the real issues are, these are smart, curious, talented people. It's not that the incentive system is insurmountable, it's just that without data, they're going to go someplace where the data are available so they can publish. If you give them access to data, I guarantee you they will be interested in your problems. But I have to comment a little bit on what Bob said, because there are pieces of what he said that are true and parts that I think we could put a different slant on. Faculty will do resist the idea of a short-term publication piece, that they really want to do thoughtful research. But they are smart enough that they can give you a quick turnaround. If you are using them as a brain trust, they'll talk. I mean, you can't get them to shut up if you get them on an issue that they care about. So use academics for a brain trust. Let them come in and exchange ideas with you. You tell them what their problem is. Have them help brainstorm with it. I guarantee if it was a good conversation, they're going to go away and try to figure out a way to do research on issues you care about. So I think it's partly been, we've had two communities that haven't bothered to communicate with each other. The practitioners are happy to say, oh, you folks are too slow and you're not relevant. And the academics are like, well, I can't get your data. I got to publish something, so I'll publish where I can get data. And that's where the Europeans have it all over us, because they have those data sets. As things coming out of Denmark and the Scandinavian countries, I'm sure you see this, man, I love what they can publish, because what the data they can get from government.
Well,
So-
and government's funding.
Yes, absolutely.
So that is not happening here.
Right, absolutely.
These governments are funding this data.
So to wrap it up, I know you don't want me to take in all this time. I don't think this is a problem that cannot be solved. I think it's a problem that we haven't tried to solve. We are happily sitting in our separate trenches saying, it's you folks don't understand us, and it's you folks who I have tried with faculty to get them to engage in things like the conversation, to engage in these blogs. And the conversation that I've gotten from faculty are, well, yeah, I spent 6 years learning how to write for an academic journal. Now you want me to write for a blog? And I'm like, wait a minute, you can do this in a shower. You can outline the blog that you post that is based on your research in the shower. And then how hard is it to write 3,000 words for somebody who's using, manuscripts or books or journal articles? 3,000 words is not hard.
Less is harder than more.
No, it isn't. Not if you've got the idea. No, it isn't.
It's interesting because I think in a couple of the GTU sessions, one of the things that we noticed was that if you are talking about a particular problem, there could be many different kinds of products that flow from that problem. Some of which are short-term. I love the brain trust analogy. Some of which could be, quick analytics of sort of help me make sense of this. Short-term interviews, data, qualitative, and that can trigger a much longer-term study that does lead us to a different place in the field. So I was going to ask though, with Steve, can you talk about whether or not, is this a problem that is unique to public administration, what we're describing?
It's not, but before I answer that question, I comment on what's been said, which seems to me to be far too romantic in a way. My experience with faculty, and I don't mean this to be critical, I mean it to be just a straight up observation, is that they're like plants, which is to say they're tropistic. So plants grow towards the sun and their roots grow towards water. Faculty grow towards money. And you used exactly the right words before. If you want to incentivize faculty to do more practical work rather than theoretical work, you simply put money in their face, and you'll be astounded at how American they turn out to be. The president seems to be worried about the patriotism of American faculty. Let me reassure you that my experience being a university president for 30 years has taught me that professors will talk a good game, but in the end, they've got orthodontics and mortgages and such, just like everybody else, and they actually work for money. So
and science.
And science.
Don't they want?
Yes. No. They want many things.
Yeah.
But the most direct way to get somebody to do something in this country, and maybe the world, and even among faculty, is to say, if you do this, I will pay you. And people will frequently do it. Now, sometimes they won't. I once turned down a $10 million grant from Omar Gaddafi because I didn't want to do what he wanted me to do. But that was the only time in my life I can think of where I did something like that.
So because money is not falling off of trees, and we can't necessarily solve this just through that, although I really do appreciate that as a powerful incentive to change sort of it influences the market just like it does in any other space.
Okay. Do you want me to answer your question?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. So, George Bernard Shaw once said that all professions are a conspiracy against the laity, and that is surely true. Physicians, when they talk about what's wrong with you, use words that make it impossible for you to ascertain what's wrong with you unless you stress that you want them to speak in English. And that's true of lawyers and people in all walks of life, and academics as well. So I think part of the problem is that we have trained up, as Barbara has indicated, people who have learned language for academic journals, which is, I guess, just to the right of sociology. And the result is that lay people conventionally can't pick up PAR and other kinds of journals and find any utility. You asked about other professions. The one that comes most immediately to mind is the law. Law professors are advanced, as are professors in other disciplines, for publication, for scholarship. And they publish most of the time in law reviews. Law reviews, funnily enough, are not driven by professionals like PAR or the other public administration journals. They are driven by law students, the best law students in the American law schools. And once again, they publish materials which are presumably of utility to the discipline. At least that's the theory. When I was coming up as a law student, lawyers, judges, used law reviews to inform their work, to inform their practice, to inform the decisions they wrote, the briefs they drafted. Recent conversations of U.S. Court of Appeals judges, Supreme Court justices, indicate that the law reviews have become so scholarly that they are no longer of utility to either judges or practitioners. And that the result is they are no longer consulted by these people in doing the professional work. You could ask yourself why. Part of it has to do, I think, with the changing nature of the law professoriate. More and more law schools are proud to boast about how many PhDs they have on their faculty. One judge said to me that what he does is look at the sequence of the degrees by the author of the article. If they have a law degree and then got a PhD, he generally will find some utility in the article. But if they have a PhD and then they get a law degree, he concludes that they didn't get tenure in whatever discipline they originally had. They were smart. They asked themselves what they could do. They went to law school. They studied. They graduated at the top of their class. They got jobs as law professors. When it came to writing, particularly after they got tenure, they wrote about Kafka and the law, or Plato and the law, and a variety of things that didn't have anything to do with the day-to-day practice. So we see that in the law. I think that's probably less true in engineering and less true in more mathematical issues. I think also, as we became more, how do I put it, scientific, as the articles we write became more scientific, which is to say more mathematical, they became of less and less utility to practitioners. And I find I can't, when I was president, I used to try and read the publications of my faculty, and particularly in fields I thought I had capacity to do so. So physics was out of my range. I discovered I couldn't read the dissertations or the articles written by English department faculty. And not because I don't have a command of the language, but simply their use of the language simply eluded me. So I think it's an issue that permeates the academic community.
Well, let's actually, Suzanne, I hope that maybe we can pick up on that and talk about this concept, this notion of translation, right? So we heard a little bit about the evidence for practice, or different, a blog versus a short term versus a journal article. How do we conquer this issue of translating academic gobbledygook into...
Oh, wait a minute.
Just kidding. Into ways that practitioners can actually pick it up and use it.
And that's a great question. And I think that's something that we've heard a lot of already this morning, or this afternoon, and policy has changed. But I come at it from a totally different direction. I've been at the university and in graduate education for a while, and in industry and so forth, and now dealing with, let's say, about 800 senior executives in the federal government every year in educational programs. And so what do they need and what do they get, and how do we get it to them, and how do we make it useful for them? I think that's kind of what we're looking for. One of the things that we do in particular is to look for the research base in the courses that we teach, and to bring that research into the design and delivery of the course. That's necessary, and so having that research is critical for us to be certain that what we're doing is going to be sound when we're teaching it. And unfortunately, it is also a big translation piece, because as we've talked about, very few practitioners have the time or understand the language to the point that giving them too much of the research to read is going to be of value. So we need to be able to dilute it to their understanding and their immediate application. I enjoyed the fact that you referenced your editorial of that when you looked at the what do we have plenty of and what do we not have much of. And when I looked at those lists, I found that some of the things that I'm desperate for are some of the things you have not much of. And
Like what?
well, the ability to deal with the polarities that we're experiencing right now is something that I'm seeing in much higher degrees in the programs that we're delivering over the last couple of years than we have in the past. And it's not necessarily political polarities only, it's also diversity polarities as well. And so we're looking at people who really need to know, they want to talk about it, they want to understand it, and they want to be able to manage a team or an organization that is fractured. So we need that sort of research, and we then are dealing with the dilemma of how long will it take to get it. I work for the federal government, we don't have any money to use for that sort of thing, so how do we find the right connections to do it? We're doing some things already to try to eliminate that problem. I mean, we have, one of the first things that happened when I got in the position as the director of the Federal Executive Institute was Bob appeared and said, let's see if we can do something with American University and create an MOU so that we can bring in the work that you're doing into a degree program. And while we still go back and forth on funding and try to figure out the very right way for that to happen, that is a good start, and that we're able to give some of that practical application work while the university supplies the theoretical and research deep space in the academic program. We're working with Batten right now in a way to do a couple of things. One thing that's happening that we have both, Batten and FEI, have found very rewarding, and that is that quarterly we bring Batten students to dinner at the Federal Executive Institute. And that gives the students the opportunity to question these senior executives in government about what do they know and why are they doing it, and what are they doing and what are their challenges, which actually also spurs the students' interest and develops some research topics for the students to go back and in the reverse, it gives the senior executives an opportunity to see what's coming from the universities and what they are going to be reading in the future and what they know that maybe the seniors don't know. So that's worked really well for us. Another thing, and I was trying to think about, translation is one thing. If I read it and I translate it so that my students can understand a topic that might be difficult is one thing. But the other thing is different kinds of translations. We also work with a different part of Batten when we work on some of the simulations they developed and some of the simulations to demonstrate tackling problems. We've worked also with Booz Allen on some of the simulations that they've been putting together that we find very helpful. They're research-based. They bring in good information, but they then give the practitioner an opportunity to experience it and try it and learn from it with a hands-on approach where they're more comfortable. So the ability to begin to think about how we present the research and to bring it into ways that can be more aligned to the particular situations and challenges that the practitioner has helps make that translation possible in ways that we might not have thought about in the past. Another thing that we have that has been really interesting, and I was trying to think, if I don't have any money, how can I do something that might be interesting and spur some research in the areas that we have need of research in. And another area that I have a responsibility for is a design lab. And we have found that that has been very rich in helping people better understand different dimensions and different aspects of a particular problem, as well as to develop some place to go forward to research and develop and provide solutions for the future. So it might be that it's really all there. It's like Barbara was saying, I think if we can just find that window and get the window open, then the air will flow in both directions. And that, I think, is probably the hardest part, but it might be the easiest part too, if we begin in some small ways and begin trying some different things.
So I'm going to just ask one more question before we open it up, and it's just a slightly different frame on, I'm a practitioner and I have a problem, can you help me solve it? Versus I'm a practitioner and I have a problem, and there's a lot of literature and insights and field and knowledge that we could point you to. If, how do we bridge that gap, which is a different one? I don't know if anyone in particular wants to answer it.
I'm not quite sure what you mean, that there's a lot of research already and the practitioners are aware of it? Is that what you mean?
How do we make sure that practitioners are getting relevant research sort of piped in their direction? So it's not just about the demand of what they need each day, but what knowledge there is to pull from that already exists.
You almost need a clearinghouse. I don't know what form, structure that would take, but it may be a blog. It may be where practitioners post up, maybe anonymously. You don't have to say what agency, but I got a problem with X, Y, and Z. What literature out there will speak to it, and I can see if you put a few really smart doctoral students on that, academics could make it part of a student's assignment in a doctoral seminar. Answer this question.
It's like Dear Abby.
Yeah. So that's one way. I think I lament the loss of the IPA. I mean, I know it still exists in theory, but it's rarely used. These days, we have more people leaving government looking for a landing spot to wait out, a change in administration than we have academics going into administration to spend what we would call 6 months or a year or a semester kind of thing. That cross-fertilization of ideas would be very useful, and they still get paid, so there's, the money is still there. In fact, they usually get paid more because they get paid summer salary as well, so they wind up actually getting a boost. So I think there are ways to do it. We just have not attended to the problem. I think it's money, it's time, it's energy, it's advocacy of this kind of a connection.
Yeah, and we should talk about IPA.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I always thought the IPA was largely a device used to create a soft landing for somebody who tried to push out.
What are they?
Governmental personnel. You'll pay salary of somebody who goes out of administration into a university setting for a while, or I don't know, I presume a think tank will let you do it. And then the other way around, academics can go work for a year in administrative setting.
We at the Volker Alliance had Dustin Brown, I don't know if you know Dustin from OMB, on an IPA in our organization for 6 months, and it was incredible, I think, for both sides.
Oh yeah, it's very fruitful, very fruitful.
To reframe.
And there's another opportunity that I didn't mention, and that is I have a wealth of data, and I mean, as you know, government's working on big data and how we use big data, and I have a wealth of big data on practitioners who come to the programs that would be fabulous. I'd keep.
Let's talk.
Yeah, let's do it, because doctoral students could do absolutely amazing things with what we have.
Well, beyond that, if you started to IPA people into the programs So academics, but also PhD students, especially like, and I think Rob, OPM, and help them understand the data sets, but to all of the different agencies with data sets so that they understand the data definitions, you would start to get much richer PhDs that would also be more relevant, and you'd build relationships. So IPAs have often been used to bring people from academia into government, which then if you get them early in their career, then they go back to academia, they're much more practical
Absolutely.
in their,
That's right.
in their, what they focus on.
And they know more.
They know a lot more, they ask much more relevant
Yes,
questions.
absolutely.
And a real win for a university is if you IPA with someone who's ready to go on sabbatical for a year. And so the person goes on sabbatical, they come live with me for a year at the Federal Executive Institute and teach and do research and immerse themselves with these senior executives. And that's their sabbatical experience. Meanwhile, I'm paying Barbara for that person's, and then she can get a visiting professor to come in and backfill. So it's great opportunities. We need to use it more.
So there, you've been trying to ask for a number of, go ahead.
I was going to make a first two comments. The first one, I think this interaction between supply and demand, I'm Andrew Potter from Australia, there's an issue of different timing of academics and practitioners. The academics are looking backwards in terms of what's happened in the past and what they learned from that. And when they do something, it's a long-term issue. The practitioners are looking ahead. I've got a problem, how do I answer it? But they're also wanting something quick. So if they ask for the research to be done, by the time the research comes in, then move on to something else.
Right.
So the issue is how do you get that interaction right on the different timing perspectives? And the answer is, the first question should not be from the practitioners, please research this, but what do we already know? What do we know already from the research that's relevant to the problem I've got? And that starts a conversation. That may, over time, through osmosis, lead to the researchers rethinking what they're going to research, but don't get the practitioner to ask for a particular research. Almost 9 times out of 10, it won't be there in time to actually help.
Right.
So the issue of the interaction has got to be around different time perspectives, and it does have to be iterative then, and that's where the issue of conversation that was being talked about earlier comes in. The second point I was going to make was, coming from Australia, there is a particular US perspective on this issue. The issue is a universal one between academics and practitioners. But in the US, the research is so focused on data and P's and R-squares and so on. And you'll find a lot of other places that a lot more emphasis will be on case studies. What actually is happening, what do we learn from that when we link it back to research, back to theory, and there'll be a much more practitioner-oriented research in a lot of other places than in the US. I'm not too sure why that is so.
Yeah, I think the more scientific the research is, the less practical it turns out to be.
There's nothing non-scientific about using case studies.
No, but well, less mathematical, less quantitative.
I think the last question really hit the dilemma that we're facing in our field on the head. And my perception, having been in the field for about 4 decades now, is that we're going through, our field of public administration is going through a period of change that's almost unprecedented and maybe historic in terms of the rapidity of change is greater now than it ever has been in the last 300 or 400 years in our field. And the question then becomes, how do we create the time machine so that the researchers can get into where the problem solver has to go in today's world? And I don't care, I operated at the local regional level, and I don't, as well as at the federal level, and I don't care what level I was at, the political person, the administrative person are confronted with issues that are beyond what we did in the past.
Yes.
And the speaker, Suzanne, I think when you started talking about a network world as opposed to a data world, I think you were getting close to where we need to go. And the use, and I want to just reinforce case studies. Behavioral science and the characteristics of behavioral science, which you learn out of case studies if you do them correctly. And furthermore, you can apply theory. It's hard to apply data, but you can, particularly if you have evidence-based data on your case area. But how we form networks, and those networks are, I don't think we've yet explored enough. What are the possible networks we can create? How can academia be part of advisory committees and vice versa in the other institutions?
And that, you know, that notion of networks, there's a lot of science on networks as well.
And there's science.
And but when I say, you know, that expression is not rocket science, we've heard a lot about the need of just bridging and bringing people together more regularly to have conversations. That is a network, right?
And just to finish my comments, my staff and myself, I made sure that they were in every advisory. We have 7 or 8 research institutions within our region. We were on all their advisory committees. They came over. We found out what this was in Southern California. We found out what they were doing. We got the best of them to come and be our consultants. Secondly, we asked those who were involved with us for them to do studios or practicums on the issue we were involved in. And we created a dynamic that was helpful to us. And secondly, they got a lot of research. They got a lot of publications out of it. So the question is, how do we redefine the networks of participation so that we create a new time machine for our field?
Yeah, just listening to this, I want to throw out 4 ideas, sort of concrete ideas. First, and some of this may be for consideration by the Volcker Alliance, whether it's with ASPA, or, with ASPA, NAPA. One is a relevance index. So it's changing the incentive structure. So if you're going to go to the situation where academics actually get evaluated, not just on their, their publications and their citations, you gotta, how relevant is their research? Washington Monthly tried this many years ago, I think at the undergraduate level, and it might be worth looking at and trying to think about, could we do this in a way that would actually make it real? And then could we get schools to start to pay attention to it? Several people, Paul talked about Italy and Mexico, I think, funding data or something. We just got this whole evidence-based right-to-work law passed, in a sense, creating lots of make work and a lot of silos that a lot of us are trying to make actually useful. But it would be really interesting to see what the laws look like in Italy and Mexico and other places where it works well, and maybe get that into the debate here. Third, the What Works clearinghouses are a disaster. They are, why? For 3 reasons. Reason 1 is they're written in academic language if you can get to them. But actually, reason 2, they focus on average results, so what works on average, rather than looking at distributions. So you don't see what the outliers tell you about what might be effective for some subsets of people or ineffective for some sets. Third, they're just not translated to practitioners, and when they are, a lot of the research is behind the paywall. And so trying to get that stuff from in front of the paywall so practitioners can use it. So actually getting a really good conversation going about how we do this translation. Someone talked about the Reader's Digest of this, doing Reader's Digest, et cetera. PAR has started to do these bullet points and everything, but you still have to go to the PAR review. How do you get it out to people? So really thinking through how we do the translation, and you have these What Works clearinghouses in several agencies, and you could have a very constructive conversation about how do we actually make these more valuable. And then the 4th suggestion I would make is, and again, I'll throw this out for the Volcker Alliance or for other, NAPA, if it wants to raise other money, is funding lit reviews. So if you do this idea of creating a networked online community with Dear Abby questions, and then somebody to do it, and put out little seed grants for lit reviews that have to get translated and, to make more sense, that could be helpful. And you can talk to Radnor School Dean Sherry Gleed, who has given some models of how they've done this in the medical world, a little bit better. So those are just 4 concrete things coming out of the issues and opportunities raised here.
Hi, I'm Sally Jagger, formerly GAO and now with NAPA for a few years, just to give a context. I find that there's a question that's not being raised or a source that's not represented that I see in the room. We talk about what people need to do, and then we talk about how to do it. And I think that, especially in Washington, people turn again and again and again for how to the consulting firms. Okay? And so if you want to know that side of the world, that's how they make their living. That's their bread and butter. And often it works. Not always, but it always works. I think that they should be part of this conversation because they're the ones who in many instances take the academic results and synthesize it and write fantastic PowerPoints that you can find online and use yourself. They, for me, often are the translators because they keep up with the academic and they translate it and apply it and they try it and it works or it doesn't work. So when I'm looking for how to do something, which is most often what I'm working with agencies on, how do you do it? They often know what to do. I need a strategic plan or I need culture change, right, Barb? We're working on a project, right, Jonathan? How to do it or what to do, they know what it is, but they don't know how. And I think there's a lot of information we're not tapping into. Tried and failed sometimes and tried through it others.
And the reason it works is because they have the economic incentive that you were referring to, that faculty members don't have. Capitalism works.
They've got to know the what.
Yes.
They've got to know how to do it.
Yeah.
That's where the bridge is. And they serve an important role in that.
No question. Don Bathurst, formerly with DHS, some other places. This is an excellent point and hits on several things. It's that even, I would say, in some ways, within talking federal U.S., we don't even know how to really describe what the issue is. Most of my research background has been more in the scientific side, specifically fire protection. I've worked for many years as an agency sponsor for projects at NIST, and we used to laugh about, we got these PhDs in a dark lab in Gaithersburg shooting lasers through flames. But so what? I'm trying to build a building, I'm trying to retrofit, I need to understand what the impact, on the built environment is going to be. And I was able to describe those problems and with money, direct their research to answer the problems that I needed. We built models, we were able to, we also burned a lot of stuff, almost burned down their large scale test facility one day. That's a whole other
I
story.
wish we had time for that.
Oh, I got pictures, a video actually. But that was, and again, the issue of the time machine. A lot of this work was 30 years ago, 35 years ago. Now, in practice, in my engineering field, that's how we do work and design. So this is evolutionary. But what the problem is over this time, within the federal government especially, we've lost that ability to do work. 30 years ago, we had people who could do a strategic plan inside as space. So, we have this shadow side, and what makes it even worse, and this is maybe a challenge for our friends at FEI, is the senior executive service anymore, and I'm former chair of the board of the Senior Executive Association, has really changed. We don't really have general executives anymore. We have general managers. They're they're technical managers. We recreated the super grades for the purpose of pay. And people go in, they get promoted as the budget director, and they stay in budget. They haven't moved around. They don't, so they're not doing the things that we need public administrators to do, is to manage the activities and for results. They become practitioners. And somehow we've got to get this message out there. And I think the grand challenges may give a significant menu of things to be looked at. And I love Andrew's idea of even more case studies to really show what works and frankly what doesn't work needs to be identified also.
I may have missed it, but my name's Rich Callahan. I edit the journal, International Journal of Public Leadership and faculty at USF. Early in my career, when my wife worked at the US GAO and I worked for the County of Los Angeles and as a city manager, it occurs to me that we speak of practitioners as one homogenous group. Her career was very different and better than mine at the GAO than myself as a city administrator. And so my question really is how to, is there utility in really distinguishing or finding distinctive discussions about practitioners and stop lumping that together? Again, with much of the experience at the federal level, it's very different than Mark and I's experience at a regional or city level. And the second question is more of a Napa question. How's this discussion getting traction? Like, what happens next, and how do we operationalize what's been discussed today to a next step?
Sarah, maybe you can take the front part and talk about your regional venues where you've got local government together with educators.
I mean, one of the things that we're really interested in at the Political Alliance is that you can work at all levels of government and the needs are different. And not just in terms of the talent pipeline, but just in terms of the research needs and what they're looking at and how, you know, in Kansas City, we met a woman from the mayor's office who was focused on regulating the scooters that are popping up everywhere. That's a really different problem than the Department of Transportation, the federal government is wrestling with right now. So we believe that there are synergies in bringing folks together, and that there'll be differences, but that if you were to say pick a priority research topic in a region, a particular topic, we might be able to come at it in lots of different ways that would speak to different practitioners. And so I don't know if that answers the question. I think your point is it doesn't. But it's such a good question, because it's not only are there different levels of government, but there's thousands of, you know, municipalities and different kinds of government organizations. And when we say practitioners, we do have to really think about the differences.
Well, and one of the things you see if you look at graduate schools of public administration is that they have personalities and cultures. So that the Maxwell School it tends to focus on the state of New York. By contrast, NYU and City College, City University focuses on the municipal government. When I got my degree at the Kennedy School, back those days called the Littauer School, everybody there was preparing to become a member of the cabinet. So I think the notion that we train public administrators, even those who have degrees, I mean, public administrators don't have public administration degrees, but even that we train them all, that is less true, I think, if you look at the law, because it's controlled by the American Bar Association, and obviously, any place you go to law school, you're going to have to take contracts and torts and procedure. There's a variety of courses that simply have to be done. Similarly, I think, with medicine, where the American Medical Association in many ways dictates what the medical schools do. There's a lot less room for idiosyncratic behavior.
So,
Yeah.
I was just going to say, when we're thinking about practitioners and practitioner problems, I think it's helpful to distinguish between those who are creating public policy and those who are implementing public policy. And if that distinction, if we can keep that distinction in mind, the research around public policy creation, I have a problem with scooters, is different than once I create the policy about scooters, how do I get it implemented in a way that it's enforceable and people stop killing themselves on the scooters? So when talking to practitioners, a focus on, or a more limited focus on, how do I implement public policy, I think would be helpful.
Sarah, I think, by the way, I didn't introduce myself earlier. Mark Pisano, and I both with Napa and USC Price School, and previously ran the regional organization for 3 decades. And Sarah, the second part of Rich's question would really be helpful to spend time on. And Shelley started this process by suggesting some specific methods.
Yeah.
And Suzanne, you really put some ideas on the table, but how do we in fact, and I'm going to use the metaphor again, how do we create the time machine? Because in the field that I've been working on, I would say that what went on 30 years ago isn't helpful to what's going on today. What went on last year and the year before may be helpful. What I find the administrators in my region, in my state, and I think from what I've been doing at Napa, I think it's across the country, they're trying to figure out where is this field going and how in fact do we help to steer it, because right now it's freefall. It's sort of in a free form out there, and the problems are popping up and the dilemmas are popping up and the difficulties are getting more intense. So how do we take Rich's second question and start to really operationalize it?
Yeah. Terry, do you want to speak a little bit to the second question? Because I think just thinking about NAPA's role or other organizations in the space, how they might play a role in taking the talk into action.
Sure, I'll take a crack and then I'll give it back to the panel. So this is one of the reasons, and of course Mark, you know this from being on the board, one of the reasons why we created the Grand Challenge framework was to have an agenda for the field of public administration that would attract both the researchers and their long-term perspective and the practitioners and their near-term perspective around a set of topics. It may be huge, but in a way that everyone can kind of find their interest in those and start to align the different timelines, the different motivations, and start to create these networks or communities of interest, if that's your term, around the topics that become the grand challenges. It's not that people aren't already doing work on the things that will ultimately get collated, but we think it's going to give us a way to collect communities around those topics in a new and different way. And in my head, and we'll see if it plays out this way, every one of those grand challenges will have at its hub a or many research institutions. Schools of public administration could be schools of engineering, could be schools of science and technology, who say that grand challenge aligns with my institution's agenda and objectives, and it fits with what we're working on, and we want to be aligned with that. And once that happens, then private sector organizations, public sector organizations, nonprofits who are also working in that kind of space will start to align. And we envision the role of the academy being to foster the development of those communities, to facilitate the collaboration space. That's really managerial speak, and I apologize. But to get people together to talk about the topic at hand and start to align the work along the timeline. So here's some stuff that needs to happen. It needs to happen in the next 18 months. Here's some things we're thinking about, and we think they have a 10-year horizon. How do we start to move forward on the short-term problems while we're also informing the longer-term perspectives? We envision it as a decade-long agenda so that when you're looking back 10 years from November, they'll say, yes, we actually put these programs into place. We started these research programs, we've learned these things, and we can now see how we're making progress. So that's kind of the vision about how we see it all come together. While I have the mic, I'll get it again later, but you have a card on your chair about the grand challenges. everybody in here has at least one opinion. I know you do. And this is your opportunity to get those perspectives into the project so that they can be reflected. And many of you are academics, and many of you are practitioners, and some of you are both, right? So don't walk out of here going, well, that was interesting, and that was, yeah, now I'm gonna go get some coffee. I want you to walk out of here and say, wow, that was interesting, and I got some good ideas, and I've got a project I'm gonna take back. If I'm a practitioner, I want you to walk out of here and go, wow, I never thought about asking Barbara, or asking Bob, or asking Steve, or finding a grad student who could work with me on a project. Now I have a new idea. And if you're a researcher, do not walk out of here and go, yep, see, I was right all along. You need to walk out and make sure that you're connected with a practitioner who can say, this is really what I need to know, or how I want to look at it, and find some ways to collaborate. So from the Academy's perspective, we're really trying to use this to create the collaboration opportunities that you all are saying are so important. We'll see if we're successful. Right back to you.
There's a hand in the back over there, yeah?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I'm Lenore Stiles, I'm the Treasury's head of strategic planning, and we also run an internal consulting group, so I'm happy to say that we do have internal capacity, at least at the Treasury Department, to still do strategic planning. But in terms of answering that question around how we can kind of bridge this gap and think about timing, we have natural inflection points from the practitioner perspective where research would be timely, and that is really around the strategic planning cycle. So then you're also kind of narrowing your target audience within the practitioner field to the people who are in charge of strategic planning or who are responsible for developing learning and research agendas, which we are now all required to do. I think you'll find that strategic planners and chief evaluation officers are going to be natural allies, if not the same person, in the next, decade or longer, however long this law is on the books. So I would just consider, as you're thinking about solutions and taking action from this conversation, to think about that strategic planning cycle, think about the learning agenda cycle, think about them as natural inflection points for infusing research into policy making, because that is where we're setting our longer term goals, and that's a 4-year horizon, so I think that's reasonable for thinking about research projects and infusing that into the practitioner space.
Hi, I'm Steve Hamill, I'm chair of the Board of Trustees at the University of San Francisco, so Rich administration program, a big part of our school. But one of the things I want to relate to what Terry said, I commend you for actually trying to focus on those grand public challenges. As an administrator, and I worked in local government for many years and worked in public finance for a number of decades, but I think the toughest thing for an executive in government is that they deal with 40 problems a day, not just one. And the key for them, and the key here, I think, is identifying what are the priority public challenges that really are important to those practitioners. You're not going to address all 40, you're not probably going to address 15, but if you can get it down to 5 to 10 priority challenges and coalesce around those, I think you have a chance coordinating and connecting with those practitioners in a way that hasn't been done in the past. And I relate to the comment about diluting our research down for public administrators or practitioners. Be careful. I think that's, there are bright people that are practitioners and they can pick it up. It may be that they're too pragmatic and maybe we're too opaque on the research side, and there needs to be some cooperation within that. But I think you're on the right path. I think you've got a great vehicle to operationalize this, as Rich was saying, because of what you're doing in the grand public challenges, and within that process, setting those key priorities that we can.
Can I suggest one other practical strategy? Universities have seminars where faculty members come in and present their research. Every place has once a week, once a month, whatever the cycle is. What if we had practitioners come in and give a seminar on, here are the challenges I've got at OMB, transportation, so that the practitioner coming in has got an audience of people who are listening to, oh, what are the practical challenges they're going, and in their heads they're going to be going, okay, I see that relates to this body of work, this body, and you're going to get somebody in the room who might say, oh, I'm ready to do some research on this project. And so Johnny Appleseed, you're going out and planting the seeds of what are your immediate problems and getting people to look at that. Just another way to build it. I've heard reference to networks, to collaboration. That's another way to make a better connection.
There's a tangent, that idea came out of one of our, military GTs, called a speakers bureau. And the idea that the universities would invite particular practitioners to come in and they would get the audience together. I think the emphasis there was more around sort of inspiring students to understand what government careers might offer. But what you're describing is that it doesn't only have to be one stop kind of shop, right? I mean, there would be value beyond that.
Can I take a slightly contrarian point of view here for a second? I think we want to also take care not to disappear the differences between the academy and practitioner community. They are slightly different roles, and I think it's useful to have both to create a synergy that's enhances the two of them. Now, having said that, one funny story, which takes 1 sentence. I came out of government and I went up to Boston University where I became an associate dean. And I got a memo the first day I was there, and it said that there would be an emergency meeting of the Faculty Senate a week from Thursday. And I thought, those are the kind of emergencies I'd like. That'll keep till a week from Thursday. Because when I was in government, if you had an emergency, you stayed there all night until the emergency fixed. So, we are living in slightly different worlds. Practitioners don't get sabbaticals. Their calendars are very different than the academic calendar. Their calendars have May, June, July, and August. And so I think these are important distinctions and not trivial.
Three quick things. One, a potential source for what are major challenging issues facing the nation is GAO's strategic plan, because they distill down what are the issues that Congress faces. Second is the IBM Center for the Business Government, where I work. Every 3 or 4 years, we do a convening of academics and nonprofits and people from OMB and Hill and state and local government agencies to ask them what are the major challenges that they're facing that bring our research proposals that we do over the next few years. And third is what I never have been able to understand from academic journal world is why do they insist on people submitting a complete, perfect article when there's no clue as to whether that's of use or not. And people will do all this research and formatting and all this stuff to submit something to find out whether anybody even cares. And the way the IBM Center does it is we ask for 100 words with maybe a 2-page explanation of what is your idea, and we will decide 90% of the time that, that's probably not a really smart thing to spend your time on. Why don't you do this instead? And then when they frame their research, it's useful. And it doesn't burn up the academics' time doing something that they don't know that somebody doesn't think is useful. So.
I just want to throw in one other chance. Quentin Wilson, I'm working in the Practitioner School. I'm from Missouri, and that's where I did my practitioner work. And now, in the spirit of Jesse James from Missouri, I'm hiding out as an outlaw in the Practitioner School. But I think there was some talk about networks, and I think I just want to throw one other problem. It's too late to tackle another one, but it isn't just between practitioners and researchers. Within research in the community, within practitioner community, there's a lot of divides. The silos in practitioners is just as bad as this. I was a commissioner of higher ed back in Missouri, and I couldn't find any research application when we were in the business. But it was within government too, so if we're working on chronic absenteeism like I am now, well, you had to talk to now the health people, the education people. Somebody was talking about behavioral sciences and nudges, there's lots of different specialties. So it's not just, there could be somebody who's a genius. I think where I come on, to the point is really Bob Tobias is there with your implementation center. It's like, it's implementation, and that means, the one place I've seen so far, and this is not to recommend anything to anybody, I've picked Shelley's brain, John's brain on these things, but the Carnegie Network Improvement Community work, if anybody's familiar with it, they're focused in education. I know the NERM group down in North Carolina is focused on health, but in these different areas, there's some exploration going on. There is multiple parts of government and multiple disciplines in academia. So I don't know if that's an answer, just maybe 1,300 different challenges.
One of the things, and Terry, I don't know if we want to start to move toward a close, but we were really interested in not doing was just sitting up here and talking about the problem, all these things we can't solve. And so what was really encouraging, I think, about this conversation, and thank you for your active participation in it, was that there was a focus on the ways that we might move forward. And I've only been at the Vulcan Alliance for 6 months, but the nature of this problem, it's pretty clear, right? I mean, we don't have to spend much more time sussing it out. But getting in the business of trying ways to address it, trying lots of different ways, because there's probably not going to be one big answer. That's the moment that we're in, and the more these conversations happen, the more I feel like that momentum is building. So I really appreciate the comments, and I took lots of notes, plan to report them back, and hope that we really can move to action. Anything else you guys would like to add?
Thank you.
I just want to emphasize, we're partners. This isn't, it's not one world and the other world. Public administration scholars can't be successful without understanding the world of practice. Likewise, the world of practice has a lot to gain from understanding the academic. And I think we need to be very careful about recognizing the strengths each brings to it instead of how each community is different. So looking for the positive rather than why aren't we working well together, instead emphasize where the potential is for us to build on the strengths that each group brings to the table.
I agree with Barbara. I do. And I would add to that, there have traditionally been barriers to that dialogue, to that exchange, to that collaborative effort where something emerges that's better than either party brings to the table. And those barriers have been present and they yield the result we have today. So the focus, I think, should be on removing the barriers and adding the incentives to create the collaborative environment where both parties can generate something new and different.
Paul or Jeremy, any closing remarks?
Keep us in mind. Most importantly, and we have flexibility to do creative things from time to time. We've talked a little bit about the possibility of doing something special with Viewpoint next year, which will be part of 80th year publication. We're thinking Viewpoint 2020, not the year 2020, but 2020 as in perfect vision. So if we get some good things coming in that are forward-looking, that address sort of the future of public administration from a practitioner angle, that's something we would like to consider doing. So, like we said earlier, send us an email. We're on social media, follow us. Let us know what you think.
Thank you. Paul?
No, I would agree. We've done some innovative stuff recently, as Jerry said. I feel like I'm at Fenway Park. Yeah, so we've done some symposia where they've, with Viewpoint, where they've revolved around a specific project. And so we have room to just, it's not just one Viewpoint article, it can be a series of articles.
Right. Thank you. So, again, let me go back to where I was a minute ago. You have the opportunity to think about grant challenges and submit them. I also want to ask you to think, all of you are now in Napa space, but you may not be in DC forever, and you may go out somewhere. Really want to encourage you to think about what the Academy can do to help continue these conversations. We have fellows all across the country. So if you are in Sacramento and you want to get a group of people together, we've got fellows in Sacramento. Doesn't have to be here in DC. But convening these kinds of groups is something that's right in our sweet spot. So if you've got ideas about that, I hope that you'll be in touch to follow on with us about this particular conversation so that we can keep it going. So I want to wrap up by thanking all of you for joining us and for being active participants in the conversation. I want to thank Sarah and our great panel here, and I want to thank Paul and Jeremy for joining us. I hope that you've downloaded the 300-page ASPA program book and you're carefully plotting your next 4 days because there are 27 choices per hour about where to go. But there are lots of really good ones, including the Academy's Grand Challenges panel, which is Saturday afternoon at 3:15 in the Massachusetts room. The Academy's No Time to Wait panel, which is not just reviewing the report, but talking to folks who are moving forward with some of its recommendations. That's Saturday morning at 11:45 in the Chinese ballroom, I think. And the Napa Fellows conversation that I know you and others will miss on Saturday at 4:45, also in the Massachusetts ballroom. So thank you all. Please join me in thanking